when I was a small child, my grandfather, who would babysit for me at times, would read to me out of his brother's history book, of all things. His brother had gone to Princeton in the 1890s, and the book ended in the middle of Benjamin Harrison's administration. And he read the chapter on the War of 1812 to me so many times, I think I almost had it memorized. I had a good education. I went to Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, and I also got my MA degree there. I originally was thinking about majoring in mathematics, but my love of history overcame that, and I ended up getting a major in history and then getting my master's in history. At Southern Illinois University, the emphasis was on doing, in graduate school in particular, doing a lot of original research and writing research papers. And that gave me a good grounding in everything from 17th century to 20th century materials. I went to the University of Wisconsin and had the good fortune to work there with Edward M. Kaufman, who was one of the leaders in the field. I also, while I was at Southern Illinois University, did my master's degree under John Y. Simon, who was the editor of the papers of Ulysses S. Grant. When I graduated in 1976, 1 in 19 recent PhDs in history had jobs in history. And I was among the 18 who didn't. And so I thought I was going to have to get a job in education administration. But I thought, well, I'll try to get a history job if I can. And I knew that there were historians working for the federal government. I had spent one summer working for the National Park Service as a Park Service ranger historian. And so I put in an application and eventually was hired by the Office of Air Force History here in Washington, D.C. I came out and worked for them for 14 months and then got a chance to go with the Army. And it was mainly personal considerations that led me into that decision to move. And I spent the rest of my career with them until I retired in 2011. The Army has a very large educational effort to train officers at various grades, and of course then they train enlisted people too. I'd been working, we had at that time a branch in the U.S. Army Center of Military History, which is the office I was working at, called the Analysis Branch, and the idea was that you would find out what were the big issues that were coming up and try to get ahead of them, do a historical study that would be of use for the staff when the issue became great interest to the staff in 6 months to a year in the future. Well, I think getting the Rucksack War, the book, the subtitle is U.S. Army Operational Logistics in Grenada, published, I think was my crowning achievement in the sense that it took so long and there was a lot of internal opposition to it. The then Chief of Military History decided it wasn't a happy story for the Army and canceled the project. My boss, Lieutenant Colonel Bob Frank, who had lost most of one leg in Vietnam, was able to convince him to allow me to continue to do research, because he said at some point the Army's going to want to know what happened and why it happened. One of the problems, and this is a problem with all official history, is that lieutenant colonels are generally called upon to examine these projects for classification review. And usually they don't know anything about the subject. But they do know that if this manuscript is controversial, someone might get upset with them for clearing it for publication. The first thing that really goes out of memory is the exact time at which things occur. But people will remember the sequence of events. And so if you can find some actual records that give exact times of when this plane took off or that plane took off or when this radio message was received, it helps you get the whole thing straight. Well, my wife and I have never formally collaborated, but we both read each other's manuscripts, and we try to make helpful suggestions. And at times I've done some research for her, and she's done some research for me, so there's a lot of give and take and back and forth. As long as you aren't thin-skinned and don't think your written word is the way it's got to be the first time you put it on the page, you can learn a lot from another intelligent person. I was a single custodial parent for my son from the time he was 4.5 until he was 10.5, and when I remarried. And really, he took up all my personal time during those years. I had a real desire to look after my son and do the best I could for him. And hopefully I did. Although it's easy to second guess yourself when you're a parent. And my wife has been a real support ever since we started dating. And I try to reciprocate. I think just being able to be a historian has been an achievement for me. I was really lucky when I started at the Center of Military History because the World War II generation was still there, and they were just wonderful people to work with. They knew instinctively how to form groups and deal with problems. They could. I think their experience in the war had taught them that. I look back on that branch with a great deal of affection, and I think one of the great joys of being a historian, aside from meeting my wife, is that I met so many intelligent and interesting people. If I was going to summarize my life's work in a single word, it would be joy. Because of the interest, the wonderful people I've met, the hope that I've contributed something to the Army and the nation, that is what I try to do. I'd like to be remembered as a good nuts and bolts historian, an honest person, and I think a loving father and husband.